Tara, you're on mute if you're trying to let us know that you started your, oh, there it goes, it has
Yeah.
started.
So there's our prompt for everybody to look at and consent that you're being recorded. So again, thank you everyone for joining in. Brian in there. So thanks everyone for coming to our workshop training today. I'd like to thank everyone. And my name is Ron Gordon. I am the director of the NAJAMA, New Jersey Association of Mental Health and Addiction Agencies IT project. We have on the line also with us Steve Hirsch, who is the VP of IT and other hats here at NAJAMA. He took over for those of you who remember June Noto. She retired, and Steve is stepped in and trying to fill her shoes. We have our events manager, Tara, on the line also, who helped coordinate this. I, these workshops we try to hold them monthly, and we greatly appreciate DMHAS for giving us funding, which helps us to put these together. They're free opportunities, but obviously behind the scenes, there's work that needs to get done. So DMHAS asked us to hold these workshops to help agencies get information about IT, the IT world. We run workshops on billing and coding. We have compliance sometimes. So things that agencies need to know about, and we want them to be educated and offer these for free. So we're going to be putting together, if you want to let your billing people know, we're going to be putting together a coding and billing workshop. It'll come sometime, probably um, near the end of October, beginning of November. We're still working on some dates and times. Those are always very well attended and very informational, and those will be free to agencies that are contracted with DMHAS or NAJAMA members. So I'd like to introduce Matt, and he is from Tech Mercenaries. He works with Rob Molinaro, if you people know that name. They were with Teleris, and company before that was Chorus. They just sort of did some changes, same people, just some name changes, and they are a great resource for us. They've been partners with us in helping in the areas of IT. Started out with telecommunications. They still offer helping agencies get look at their telecommunications bills for internet, cell phones, things like that. They'll look at your bills and for free and help find ways to save money. But they also have their tentacles into a lot of other IT areas. So Matt was able to help bring on Greg and Keith to do this presentation. So without further ado, I'll let Matt continue on with the introductions and a little bit of information.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. Keith, if you just want to throw your slide up, I'll talk and just tee it up. Everyone, I don't want to spend much time. I am really kind of a partner of NAJAMA in that we have access to, as Tech Mercenaries, 400 suppliers or more in every area of technology that matters. And after the many years of me losing my hair during the process, I certainly have learned through the time of who's appropriate for what size and what kind of organization, whose reputation is what. And so I have already done a lot of that filtering and help with our clients in getting the right options to look at. Back in July, when we were talking, everyone knows about, there was a big network outage and people had issues getting back up in their data, and that was simply from a CrowdStrike. But it brought to the attention to a lot of organizations, are we prepared for disaster recovery, for backup, for business continuity, and do we know what we're doing? And by the way, what is everybody else doing? and because that has evolved and has changed as well. And what's an organization that a nonprofit, a small, medium-sized business, what are they doing now differently? Are they are they doing it as a service? Or are they doing it themselves? So what is that landscape? This organization, the gentlemen who are going to be speaking, I'm handing it off to now. They have been doing this forever, and they're going to give an educational webinar on what's out there, what are your options, and why. And that's the purpose of this. So I'm going to, without any further ado, hand the baton over to Expedia and to hand it over to Greg, and you guys take it from here, and we'll go from there. Feel free, everyone, to jump in and ask questions as we go along, and or after, or put some questions into the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Greg Machida. I'm with Expedia Account Executive, and Keith and I are going to lead the presentation today. But as Matt said, let's try to make it interactive. If you'd like to ask a question, either use the raise hand function, type it in the chat. We'd like to address questions as we go, or at the end as well. So Keith, I'll give it to you for a quick intro.
Yeah, sure. My name's Keith Cadger. I'm a solution architect with Expedient. Like Greg mentioned, I work alongside him every day, helping companies leverage our cloud platforms. A lot of our projects are focused in the disaster recovery and data protection space. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, Keith, before we jump in, I think, Keith, Keith's worked on both. He's been with Expedia a few years, and he's also been on the other side of it. So, Keith, maybe just
sure.
Quick bio on where you've been, and kind of you see both sides of the fence, and kind of you've seen big organizations, small organizations. So that's really going to be the focus today, kind of real world examples, what we've seen in our careers and in the market today.
Yeah, so my background is primarily as an engineer and leader for on the IT side. I ran virtualization for a large healthcare company out of the Boston area for 10 years. But before that, it was deploying these type of solutions at an engineering level, team lead, things like that. So been doing this for a long time. Happy to share those experiences along the way here. So I think I got a couple stories to tell. So we'll figure it out. But yeah, back to you, Greg.
Yeah, go ahead. We can advance to the next slide. Yeah, so the agenda, like we said, we're gonna talk about protecting data. What are some of the occurrences that we see in the industry today? Matt mentioned CrowdStrike, which was kind of what prompted this. Ransomware is a big one. We're going to touch on that as well with a couple slides in the beginning here, just to kind of get educated about what it is. Everybody's heard of it. What are some of the best practices in the industry? What are people doing? What do I do if I'm affected? Things like that. And then how do you protect your data? Endpoint security, from an endpoint security standpoint, from a recovery standpoint, what do I do to protect it from a backup standpoint, and then as well as disaster recovery. And then we have a couple case studies at the end for real world examples of what challenges people are facing and how they address them, and how they got a business outcome that led to the organization being in a better spot.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback on that, there's a lot of reasons an organization can go down. I mean, ransomware is something that's big in the news today, and it seems to be getting worse. But we have a hurricane going on in Florida right now. Those backup recovery, business continuity, and DR is a big issue for that. There's a lot of different reasons. And so either way, what are your options today, and what makes best sense for a medium-sized organization, small, nonprofit? Go ahead, I'm sorry. In the healthcare.
Yeah, so as we move into it, we're going to talk about some of these real world examples. As we said, the CrowdStrike was one, but I think it's worth noting. Nobody saw CrowdStrike coming. CrowdStrike is one of the largest outage that the IT community has ever experienced, and we think of all these other examples of what could happen, ransomware, disasters, natural disasters, and so forth, but nobody saw this one coming, and led to a huge impact in the industry. Keith, I'll let you add some color to it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at impact, right, this affected flights globally. This affected people being able to get surgery, and it was all caused by a software update gone wrong. Like, if you want to look at it, like, quality assurance was poor. Impacted 8.5 million Windows devices, And thank God they realized it and stopped pushing that patch out, or it would have impacted more. So this is only one thing, like was mentioned. There are many different causes of these type of issues. So we're going to talk about today. Greg, you want me to hit on this one? You want to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So, I mean, ransomware, it's a thing. You'll see that logo on your right-hand side. This is what you would see if your system was impacted or got infected with ransomware. This is WannaCry. So basically, your systems are encrypted until you pay via Bitcoin to this attacker. So we don't want this. But literally, let's
Keith,
make sure. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if everyone on the phone or on this meeting is technical, in case some are just really on the business side or administrative side. Could you maybe give a definition? Maybe everyone does know, but just a broad definition of ransomware and why it's so big right now.
Yep, right here. That's where I was going with this.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, great. Thanks for queuing me up. Ransomware is a type of malicious software, right? So it's usually caused by a cyber attack, right? So an attacker gets unauthorized access to a computer system and deploys software. Typically, it's through stolen credentials, email phishing, something like that. Once that software gets into your environment, it's going to look to spread to as many different locations as it can, right? So it gets into one machine and then it spreads throughout the network. And then at some point in time, that software executes and begins to encrypt all the files that it can. And it has that pop-up that you just saw on your screen that says, hey, pay me a ransom. I want you to pay me some money in order to get back access to your data. Right? Even if you do pay that ransom, you get the decryption key. Still might lose some data or there might be issues. And if you don't pay, your data gets deleted or sold. So really, you're down. This is like you're dead in the water while this type of event happens. So some key ransomware stats, you might find these interesting or not, but I found them interesting when I was researching for this webinar. 84% of ransomware attacks are targeted at small to medium-sized businesses. And 70% of ransomware attacks are successful in encrypting data, right? 94% of the time, those ransomware attacks are targeting the backup platforms. So meaning they want to encrypt your backups so you can't recover from those either. So they're really trying to limit your options. And the average initial ransom demand is around $2 million. So it's not like you just pay it out of your slush fund money. This is substantial. I've included some links on the bottom here in case you're interested in reading those full studies.
Yeah, Keith, I think, the one of the key things that jumped out at me too was the 84% of the small to medium-sized businesses. Usually we think of these as being the large organizations are targeted, but it's really across the board. And nobody's really safe these days. I mean, it's every type of business, and they're targeting path of least resistance, somebody that's vulnerable, but they're we're seeing it in all kinds of industries.
Yeah, and the effort taken to keep everything up to date, patched, not vulnerable, is substantial. So sometimes those small to medium-sized businesses might not have the resources that they need to keep up.
Yeah. So Keith, what as we look at what to protect, you can move on to the next slide. But what are some of as we look at the industry, what are some of the best practices for organizations to look at? I think that's where we see organizations that are pretty good, sometimes better than others. But what do you see as the industry standards?
Well, it's going to start with education, right? First, we got to be aware of these type of events and not step in it. So first of all, let's not have the event. Let's educate our employees. Let's make sure that they know what ransomware is, how they could possibly fall victim to one of these attacks, right? Let's make sure that we're patching our systems, whether that's firewalls, our servers. We need to make sure that we're keeping up with those critical updates, right? We're a VMware shop. I see the updates that come up every day, or all the time, saying, "Hey, there's a vulnerability to vCenter. It needs to be deployed. It's very critical. So let's not ignore those. Let's make sure those get deployed as quickly as we can. Let's make sure that we're using good password hygiene, right? That we're changing our passwords at regular intervals. These are all common sense type things, but sometimes we forget due to our day-to-day jobs. We're just so busy. But it really starts with just following good practices. And like that last one, safe browsing practices. Let's only visit websites that are relevant to our business. Let's not download software that's from some origin we don't know. So literally just limiting our vulnerabilities by just using common sense.
Right. So employee education is a big one, and then you look at the endpoints. That's where organizations are susceptible as well. We have the protections in place a lot of times from the core, but then when we get to the endpoints, it's a little bit different. So what are we looking at there from an endpoint security standpoint?
Yeah, so every system on the network needs some type of endpoint security. We recommend using products that offer both a signature and behavioral based protection or approach. That signature approach is blocking process that we know are bad. You're downloading those DAT files or those files from the vendor on a regular basis, so you're always getting those updates. Behavioral based protection is a little different. It's monitoring the processes running on a system, and when it sees something abnormal or possibly bad or questionable, it blocks it in real time from running. So it could be a new vulnerability that just crept up. It's not known about, but it's doing something strange. So it's going to block it and then alert you to go look into it. So using these two approaches, one, blocking the known bad, two, monitoring behavior and blocking potential bad, really puts you in the best position. On the right-hand side there, you'll see 3 vendors. CrowdStrike, I know we just talked about them, but they have a fantastic product. At Expedient, we leverage the Elastic endpoint security for our deployments. We love it. SentinelOne's another vendor. I encourage you to research these if they're of interest to you, but they all make fantastic solutions that really will help your security posture.
And by the way, we always assist with that. A lot of clients, there is a intimidating number of options and choices out there. Where do you start? Who should you look at? There's only so many times in a day, and a lot of that homework has already been done. So continue. I'm sorry.
No, that was great context. Thank you.
Yeah, and then where do we go from there? Let's say we are attacked. Where do we recover? Right. That's what we're going to talk about next. I think in the next few slides are data protection and some of the areas where we talked about the outages and what can cause them. But I think the next couple of slides we'll get into that as well. So good, you can advance.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, next we're going to go into. Unfortunately, we've been impacted. There's been an event. Let's just use ransomware because we're talking that, but it could be any event. How do we?
I think the next slide has a bunch of different events. We can advance to that one. There you go.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the viruses, the malware, the ransomware. That falls into this bucket right here, but it's more than that, right? It could be aging hardware that starts to fail. It could be a power outage or a network outage at your data center location. And it could be caused by any of these natural disasters you see on the left-hand side here. Hurricane's the one that really stood out to me. Greg mentioned earlier, I used to work on the operational side. We had an office critical to the business that was based out of the South Florida location. And they were impacted by a hurricane that brought down power for 9 days. That was very impactful. That office was critical to the business. It helped to, fill prescriptions for sick patients. But about 18 months before that event, we had started planning for that. We had started to look at different solutions about how we could replicate the virtual machines and the data running in that Florida office to our Boston headquarters. So what we did is we started to set things up. We replicated the data, and 2 days before that hurricane hit Florida, we proactively failed everything over to Boston. We encouraged our user base to go work from home, and they didn't even miss a beat when that hurricane hit. When services were restored in Florida, we were able to move our data and our systems back to the Florida office. So the planning here is really what's essential. I guess looking at this and saying, hey, I've got an office that's prone to tornadoes or earthquakes or storms. Like I'm up here in the Northeast, blizzards happen. Starting to plan for these events before they happen is critical.
Yeah, and it's not only natural disasters. A lot of times it's the human aspect of it. That's a big part of it that gets overlooked as well, right? From intentional or unintentional. People are deleting data by accident, or sometimes you just get a rogue actor internally within an organization, or somebody that hacks in, as we talked about with ransomware. But there's so many different scenarios. You have to plan for the likely ones, but then there's always something that's out of your control, and it's going to be something different than you anticipated.
So
and,
true.
and what I'm finding as well with a lot of different, whether it's nonprofits or small, medium-sized businesses, is that they don't have the staff, they don't have the resources, the time, the budget, or the money to be able to ensure that if they go down or if they lose their data, how do they get back up right away? And it's getting more complicated, and it now so others are looking at, is this something that would I be better off on doing on a monthly basis, pay as I go, as I use, because rather than just try to figure it out myself and have somebody else manage that piece or prepare me to make sure when the event happens that I can get up quickly and I don't have a complicated, sophisticated disaster on my hands because I put it in the hands of those that do it best. And that's really the option, I think, that a lot of small businesses and some nonprofits, certainly in the healthcare community, to make sure they're protected because they don't have the resources, they don't have the budget, and they just can't keep up. There's not the skill sets. So this is something that really is need to be considered now, probably more than ever.
Yeah, I
Continue.
think that segues it too. I think organizations that are providing it as a service, and there's many of them out there. Expedient does some things that we're talking about here today, but there's a number of others that provide that as a service model. And using the best of breed technology, I think, is the important part. In the next slide, I think we're going to talk about the data protection, how we actually protect the data and back it up, right? And I think Keith, this would probably be a good time to talk about, backups. What's a data back, what's a backup look like versus a recovery, right? There's disaster recovery, there's backups. Sometimes they're intertwined. If you could maybe just talk a little bit about how that looks and maybe the separation there. Some people are doing backups. Is that disaster recovery necessarily? It depends on I guess it depends on what your organization needs are, right? That's really what it boils down to.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences, but really it's how quickly do I want to recover? Because backups and server replication are very different, right? I'd say they complement each other. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. But for this, let's just define what data protection means or server backups, right? So typically, when I'm using a product that's going to do server backups, they're going to protect a server at both the image level, complete server level, if you will, and at a file and folder level. So I'm going to back up my data and be able to recover it as a complete object, or I need that spreadsheet that Susie deleted last week. I can easily just grab that out of my backups, right? So there's options there. You're backing up your data, you're putting it hopefully on an immutable platform. Now, we learned earlier that ransomware likes to target the backups. It wants to try to encrypt it so that you can't recover from it. So by immutable, I mean that you can't modify it once it's written to the disk, to the solution, right? I take my backup, it's sitting on some type of storage, and I can't modify it. This always will allow you to be able to recover from it. So this immutable concept is important. All right. Another best practice that we recommend is always to replicate your server backups to different locations. More than one would be preferable, right? So you've got your copy at your primary location. Maybe you're replicating that to a cloud platform. For us, we can provide a solution that would back up your virtual machines on premise, but also replicate those to one of our data centers. So you could have two copies. If there's ever an instant where there's a problem with the one on-prem, you could recover from the cloud. So that's what we're referring to here. It's the backing up daily. So there's usually a daily protection job that runs once or twice a day, say it's 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., backs up your data a couple times and keeps it for, say, 4 weeks, say 3 months, say a year. Various companies have very, very different, times that they need to keep that data around for, retention times it's referred to. So long and short, backing up our servers, making sure they can't be modified, replicating them at different sites, and having longer term retentions. These are all good practices around backups.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, there's a lot of different technologies that you can use for this type of data protection and backups. And these are a couple that we use within our company, but Matt has access to all of them. Matt can guide you, whether you're on what you're looking for, what your budget is, what the capabilities of this software technology is, and how much of a managed service you might need. So I think that's the value that Matt and his team can bring.
And
Does
by the
anybody have
way,
any questions here? I just thought I'd take a pause and see, maybe at this point, any questions at all? Feel free to put them in the chat if we do. Okay.
I'll add to it. Really, there's those out there that do not know who Matt is with Tech Mercenaries. Ron Gordon certainly knows how to reach out to me. You reach out to Ron, and he knows how to steer everybody in the right direction. And so just an FYI.
Okay, I'm going to continue, guys, if you don't mind. So we talked about backups. So let's talk about disaster recovery. So when I'm talking about DR, I'm referring to all the processes involved with bringing up systems quickly at a second location, right? Typically, this is going to involve the replication of systems and data to a secondary site. And then a lot of times we're leveraging automation, orchestration to quickly bring things back online. Testing is essential to this type of process. We need to make sure that whatever we plan to do, that it works as intended, as it should. I like to call it on game day, but I go to push the button. I want to make sure it works. So testing is really essential to anything that you do here. There are different technologies that offer different recovery time and recovery point objectives. I'm going to dig into that in a minute. So the technologies you see on the right are things that we often offer in our environment. We'll dig into them a little bit more in a bit.
Keith, I think it used to be with a disaster recovery plan. It used to be a nice to have. Large organizations typically had them. But now it's becoming, more than just the organization itself is requiring a lot of times we're seeing it's the customers are requiring, your customers are requiring that you have a DR plan, or it's compliance, right? Or it even gets an insurance policy, cyber insurance policy. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Is it testable? Have you tested? When's the last time you tested it? They're the kind of things that we're seeing that are becoming more and more, prevalent in the industry. All right, and that's why organizations are really taking disaster recovery and backing up data more seriously, because they have to for a number of different reasons now.
So true. All right, so that's a little bit about the differences between backups and disaster recovery. They complement each other. I'll just stop there and I'll add a little context. So a lot of times what we'll see is clients will let's just walk through this process. It'll probably just explain itself a little bit more here. So typically this is the type of process that we're following when we're getting involved in a disaster recovery project. Starts with assessment, defining, planning, implementing, and test and documentation. Let's define what assess and define, right? It starts with defining our requirements. Starts really with gathering our inventory, talking about what are our virtual servers, what are our physical systems. Once we have our inventory, we want to go through it. We want to identify what's in scope. Often find a lot of our clients don't need DR protection for everything. They just want the data that's essential to their business when the time comes. So a lot of companies choose to only protect their mission critical systems. Those are the ones they want brought online quickly. And a lot of times it looks like 10, 15, 20% of a company's environment. You know, a lot of times development and test machines, those can be down for a certain period of time without having a severe impact. We can always add them in later to the solution if that's required, but really we want to spend our time to identify those critical assets and make sure those are protected, or at least start there.
Yeah, I think that's an eye opener for a lot of organizations too. They think, okay, I have all this data, all these systems. Where it's going to be overwhelming and expensive to protect everything. But I think if you look at it from that aspect, and that's those statistics you threw out there, 10 to 15% is usually where we see people start with the mission critical. If you don't know where to start with that small piece. And of course, it's everybody, depending on your business, everybody's business is a little bit different, but everybody has some mission critical data and applications that you absolutely need. If something happens, you need to get up back and running quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just when you start to look at that, just know that there are different options available to you in how we do disaster recovery. And it's typically going to revolve around what our recovery time objectives and our recovery point objectives are. So, if you're not really familiar with those terms, the recovery time objective is how quickly we can recover when we push the button to fail over, right? Some people want minutes. I want to be up in 15 minutes. Some people say I can be down for a day. So really,
You went on mute.
You're on mute. Keith, yeah, you hit mute accidentally. You're on mute.
I didn't push anything. Somebody muted.
Somebody got tired of listening to you.
There's always a prank in a group,
I don't blame you. I don't know what I was. So what I was talking about is recovery time objectives, right? So that's how quickly we can recover when we push the button. Some companies want every 15 minutes. Some people say that can be down for a day. Some people want it to be an hour. Really, we want to define those objectives and then find the technologies that allow us to meet those. From a recovery point objective, it's how much data are we okay with losing in the event of an issue, right? Different technologies offer a different way they handle replication. Some do it in near real time, meaning as data gets written to production, it gets instantly pushed to the DR site. Others take snapshots at intervals, every hour, every 4 hours, twice a day, once a day. So really, that RPO is important. Again, it will drive the decision on what technology to use that meets the objective. And then lastly, identifying that recovery location. Is this going to be in maybe in an office you already have, a data center you already have? Do you need to leverage a cloud service provider? Do you even want to manage the hardware? So we got to identify where that's going. Okay.
Yeah, and from there, I guess there we look at the plan, right? How do we put this together? Now we've identified these things. Now we have to start looking at the plan, what that's going to mean, what's the solution, our unique solution to our organization look like.
Yeah.
Just a time check, guys. We have, I think, 10 more minutes. Just so you know.
Thanks, Matt.
I think we're good, and I do appreciate that time check. So next step is really around planning, implementation. This is usually we've identified our requirements. Now I'm going in the back room. I'm trying to figure out how to satisfy those requirements. Or if you're doing it on your own, do you want to go buy that hardware? Do you want to manage that hardware? Or would you rather leverage a cloud platform? So you got some options there on how you do it. We see a lot of companies say, I'm going to do it myself. I got the people I can do it. Others might not have the manpower or the expertise to do it. At my last shop, my company would upgrade their production environment and then take the older hardware and move it to their DR site. And that was our plan. So that's how other people do it. Then I'm looking at what technologies are going to meet my RTOs and RPOs. I'm going to look at what that process of failing over looks like to make sure I'm good with it, because every solution looks a little different in how it executes a failover. Oh, cool. We can go longer if we needed. I appreciate that. And then lastly, how are we going to connect the primary site to the DR site? A lot of customers are leveraging virtual private networks or VPNs when connecting to our cloud environments. So you've got some options there. Some clients bring in circuits. It's all going to be, there's some options there. Let's just leave it there. But after we've completed that solution design, I know what hardware I'm going to use, my data center location. I know what technology I'm going to use to replicate machines. I'm comfortable with my processes. Next step is to go buy everything, set it up. And that's going to be the same whether you do it yourself or leverage a cloud service provider. And then it's connecting the primary and DR sites together and then replicating those systems and data so that they're available at both locations.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned before, testing is important, not only to know that your solution works, but also from a standpoint of your insurance, right? If you do have that insurance requirement, say, has the test been documented? When's the last time it was done? Show me the results. So I think we can talk about some of that in the next slide here.
Yeah.
Right. What does a test look like? What do we see, Keith, with if you do it on your own versus with a provider and so forth? It comes down to resources, I think, is a big thing.
So one of the great things no disaster recovery project should be considered complete until it's actually been tested. There are a lot of options on how you can do testing. We see some people decide to do a full failover. They don't care what data center they run in. They'll just fail everything over to the DR site and run out of there for 6 months. And then 6 months later, they fail everything back so that they get that warm, fuzzy feeling that it can live anywhere. More often than not, though, isolated testing is leveraged. So what we can do is create these networks that and bring those machines up on these isolated networks so that you basically can bring the virtual machines up in this isolated environment. It can't talk to any other network. Only machines that are on this isolated network can communicate with each other. So you can conduct application level testing whenever you want to without impacting your production environments. Right? So basically, I've got an isolated network, maybe at one of our cloud data centers. You bring your VMs up maybe it's just one application. You don't have to test everything at once. A lot of our clients will choose to just pick one application and do one every quarter. And while they're doing that test, they're going to create a disaster recovery runbook along with it. And that's going to detail all the steps that you needed to follow to get things working at the DR site. Maybe certain servers need to come up in a certain sequence. A lot of times we'll see databases come online before application servers, before web servers. So things like that, it'll all be documented and detailed in this runbook. So in the event that you're not available and someone else needs to push the button, or if you're leveraging a cloud service provider like Expedient, we can actually declare that we can execute those DR failovers for you. We can actually fail the virtual machines over and bring them up in an isolated network so that all you have to do is app level testing. So these DR runbooks are important so that everybody knows the sequence of events and that we follow a standardized process every time we run them.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, as we mentioned, resources and skill set within your organization. What you have the capabilities to do in-house. That's what we see from an industry standpoint. I see most people are trying to do it themselves, and some better than others. And where you start having gaps, where it's a skill gap or it's just a lack of personnel where you can't do it, then it may be time to look to a managed service provider, or a cloud service provider in our case. But that's really where your focus is on your organization. Can I do it? Do we have the resources and the time to do it? And if you have the resources to do it, then that's where people start, and then you add on to it as you need help along the way.
Can I ask a question, just as not a backup and recovery expert, although I used to work for Sungar, which was at one time the disaster recovery company of the world, right? But if speaking to someone who might not be that fluent in this, what is the difference of what it would look like if you're a client and you're using a backup recovery DR as a service and everything goes down? What is the process look like from that versus you're doing it in-house and you don't do it every day? And what types of time, it's going to be different for everybody prepared, but what would that look like? Is there a way to give some, the guests here, a scenario that is different versus, a push a button in 5 minutes scenario? If I do it as a service, I'm going to be up and running and I don't have to worry about anything. Or if I did it on my own, I might what are some of the risks of that and the differences of the behaviors you'll have to deal with on your own?
Sure. I can handle that one. So every backup technology works a little different, right? So typically, a lot of times when you do a restore from a backup, it's got to take that backup from a disk and restore it to a virtual environment. That's typically how a VM a restore would look. So there's going to be a time gap while that restore happens. Small virtual machines will restore or copy pretty quickly. Large virtual machines may take a long amount of time. So I remember having to do a restore of a 2 terabyte database server once that took, I think, like 11 hours. And that was the most excruciating time waiting for that restore job to complete. Again, small VMs, they can restore typically within an hour. But there's always a length of time during that restore process. There are backup technologies that do things like live mounting. You can actually mount the storage device that has your backups into your virtual environment and run them off that platform. That's our Cohesity environment. So basically, that expedites that whole process of recovery because you don't have to restore off disk. But let's put it this way. Typically, if I'm hearing I need to restore from a backup, it's going to be a much more lengthy process than having a virtual machine replicated and with automated failover. Like if you're using our Cohesity platform, we usually talk about a 4-hour recovery time, whereas I think that's the RPO. Long and short, I think they're like in the hour of like near real time is 15 minutes to recover, and backups, I think with the Cohesity should be within an hour. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, I know we're up against the 45-minute window, and we had a couple real world examples that I just want to. Well, I'll touch on the first one at least. Customer success stories. What the challenge was, and the first one here was a medical center that is in the Ohio area, and some of the challenges they had a primary data center. They had compliance requirements that kind of evolved over time. The compliance is being in healthcare, there's certain requirements of the data center, and they weren't able to meet those. So you look to somebody that has the SOC reports. Can I provide SOC reports, whether it's my customers are asking for them, or it's just as we mentioned earlier about the insurance policy, and the compliance reports are required for that. Some of the other things are aging. The hardware gets old, right? You have to replace the hardware. Typically, it's a 3 to 5 year cycle. Some people like to push that a little longer, with a risk associated with it. And then a big one these days has been the licensing. VMware, the industry standard for virtual machines. Broadcom bought them a year ago. We didn't talk a lot about that, but that's been a huge disruption in the industry these days. We build our clouds on VMware. It's a big part of our solution. So we see that every day, but we see our clients, they're impacted with the huge price increases from Broadcom. So that's been a lot of our conversations this year. People coming to us say, I got this big increase. I wasn't budgeting for it. It kind of came out of nowhere. Now what can we do? Either pay the VMware license fee, or look to a service provider to provide that for you. And then, do you have a secondary site? In this case, they didn't have a secondary site that was viable to recover to. So that's where you look to somebody like an Expedient or somebody like us that has multiple data centers that you can recover to. So then we provided them with a private VMware cloud. The licensing is included, as we mentioned. We get better pricing. People that provide it at scale can get better pricing than you can as an individual. And then you get that full testing and DR model where you can fail over and test it on a regular basis with the help of the provider that you choose. So what's the outcome? What do you get with that? You get the cost associated with the scaling. You also get you don't have to worry about the licensing, the hardware, the patching, the upgrades, and everything associated with the life cycle of that hardware and licensing. And you can their big thing is focus on the patient experience and focus on their core business. So that's that frees up their time. So that's what they got out of it. So I think
it's simply a matter there, Greg, of they don't have to even mentally deal with it or put cycles. It's an expert is doing it, and if there's a problem, I can go to them and I'm going to get up and running. And I don't have to buy equipment. I don't have to have resources that specifically know how to do this, do testing and all that. It's already being done for them behind the scenes. And when the rubber meets the road and they need it, it's going to be available.
Yeah. Yeah, we have another success story too, but I think in this, for the sake of time, we can skip that one. We'll send this out, but I think we'll just leave with just parting words. I think the recommendation would be as what we do when we try to offers our consultative approach. Everybody's a little bit different. The cloud isn't for everybody. When somebody comes to us, they say, I want to go to a cloud model. They say why. We always ask the why. What's important to your business? What's driving it beyond your business? Not because everybody's going to the cloud. Seems like a great idea. It's not for everybody. If you're pulling data out of the cloud, maybe that's not such a good solution. Maybe a dedicated private stack is better for your solution, or maybe you're better off doing it yourself, as we talked about, if you have those capabilities. So that's really all I had. Keith, any other things to wrap up with as we have another minute or two here?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. I'll jump in that if anyone would like to have a further questioning of what they'd be looking at, what are their options, feel free, reach out to Ron. Ron can reach out to me and I can service it and provide a more in-depth understanding of your current scenario and what another option would look like and the costs and everything else about it. But how you can reach us is certainly through Ron. Ron, you want to take it from here and kind of close it out?
Yeah, thank everyone again for attending. We'll send a copy of this recording and the PowerPoint. And thank you guys for sort of giving us a taste of some of the issues in this and what things people should be aware of when they're looking into disaster recovery, backup recovery, what they're protecting against. I think it was very informative, and maybe in the future we can do a deeper dive a little bit on what is available a little bit more, seeing some options that people would have. This is just sort of an opening higher level introduction to get people thinking and move them in a direction that everybody should be thinking about. Thanks again.
Thanks for the time.
Really
appreciate it, everybody.
Great.
Take care.
If you want to hang on, if anybody has a question immediately, you can put it up in the chat or jump in right now.